Welcome to another episode of Dirtcheapdaily. This episode is all about the wiring you're going to need to do for the manual swap so that you can drive your car normally and you won't have any check engine codes. There's two ways to go about this. The first way is what I have been running up until this point. I just tricked the ECU into thinking it was in neutral or park all the time so that I could start the car and it would run just fine, but I had a check engine light because there was no automatic transmission plugged in. Regardless of which route you're taking, you do have to do two things for any manual swap. You need to fix your key lockout, and you need to swap your speed sensor. We're going to work on this parking key lockout mechanism. So you turn the car on. Let's put it in just reverse. Let's put it in neutral, actually. The key doesn't come out. Right? So put it in park and it comes out. Actually, this is actually pretty cool. So I just pulled this, it's basically just a cover off. And it's pretty cool how this works. So when I put my foot on the brake, well first, okay, so I can't get it out of gear, right? So I put my foot on the brake, watch right here. There's just a little tiny solenoid right here that pulls back on it. So you have to have your foot on the brake to be able to shift out of park, right? It's pretty cool. We're going to take it out, obviously, but still, it's pretty cool. So then the other thing, so I do that, let's just stick it in whatever gear, right here. That clicking is the key lockout, the parking key lockout switch. So we're gonna just cross these really quick, and it does the same thing. So we're gonna just stick those two wires together, and it'll always be open. Is that cool or what? These two go to the key lockout switch, and then these two, what turn into a orange with a blue stripe and a black, but start out over here, are our parking lockout. So I have the whole setup taken apart, and I've disconnected that solenoid, and these guys I'm just gonna cut and go this way. Just snip that off, strip that back, and strip that other one back. Yes, you could solder them, that would be fine. I have a butt connector right here, and I don't want to go grab my torch. I don't know, bow tie going on. Crimp it. Now, here's the kicker. When we plug it back in, is it going to click? It clicked! So I can take the key out whenever I want. Ta-da! You could make it some kind of cool security feature where you run this to a switch and you can't get the key out unless you push a button or something like that. I don't know. You guys can think of what you want to do. But that's all I'm doing. Okay, so this is just another awesome thing about Subaru. So this transmission that I pulled, it was out of a 93 Subaru Impreza, I think. Anyway, it had a, I guess you'd call it a manual speedo. It has a manual speedometer cable that just plugs right into the back of the speedometer. But the speed sensor on the automatic fits on this older manual style speedo cable. So you just pull out the end of it, and that way you can see how it's supposed to go. So you just line these two up and you slide it in and you tighten it down. I'm gonna put this off center on purpose So I'm putting it at 90 degrees from the cross in that little sensor. And I can't get it down in there. And so this turns by itself. And so when it's in, it'll actually go in far enough. And that's how you know that it's on correctly. So again, pull this out so you have an extension on it. And slide it in. And it just clicked. Then you just tighten it up. It doesn't have to be very tight at all. It just kind of has to sit there. But I can't get any leverage on it because of the way the hole is set up. There's no room to get your wrench back farther. So I'm just going to put some Loctite on it. We might have to extend the sensor wire because on the automatic it sits up here instead of back here. So we might have to extend that wire, but there's just 2 wires. It'll be really easy to do, and we'll have our stock speedometer. It'll be great. And this one is my speed sensor that I need to extend. Once you get your manual swap mechanically finished, I just did it the halfway because I didn't care about the engine codes, and so I just wired it up so that I could keep driving it around until I figured out the rest of the wiring. So I will show you what I did to finish that up. Just a really quick caveat to the first method. The second method is just as fast, and the only difference is getting down into the ECU. There is some good info in the first method, so I will include it, but it's kind of a bit worthless in comparison to the correct way to wire it, which takes the same amount of time. I have everything back together and the light is fading. I just don't have my exhaust on, but I was doing the wiring while it was still light so I could see. So you have 2 pins, right? You have, or I guess 2 large connectors. You have this one over here, which is a 4x4, a 16-pin connector. Don't need that one. You do need this one though, a 4x3 terminal connector, and you can ignore the top 2 rows. The bottom row is the ones that you're going to want to deal with. So these 2 on the right hand side on the bottom, when this clip is up, those are the 2 that you want to jump together. So that's your neutral safety switch or your ignition circuit, whatever you want to call it. So these 2 are in contact with each other when the car is in neutral or in park for the automatic. And that energizes the starter, allows the starter to start. It won't ever allow the starter to start or be energized in first, second, third drive, whatever, or reverse. So these will allow the starter to be energized, and you'll be able to start the car at any time. Now, you do need to be careful. I'm assuming you're competent driving a manual transmission, which means that every time you start the car, you put the clutch in and you have it in neutral, right? Or at least you have the clutch in. So the way I'm doing it, it's just second nature to me to put the car, to put the clutch in to start the car. And so by just jumping those, you can start the car at any time, even if the car is in first gear, because the computer system in the car has no idea what's going on anymore. It thinks it's always just in neutral. And so you have to be the one to make sure you don't start your car in a gear. So put the clutch in every time. So now I'm going to try and figure out which of those 2 plugs that were still connected to my manual transmission, which of those 2 are my reverse lights. So I'm going to grab the 2 connectors with the stripped ends, plug them in, and jump them to those other 2. That's your ignition circuit, and these 2 are your reverse light circuits. So you can jump those 2 to turn your reverse lights on. Now what I want to do is figure out which of these 2 are my actual reverse lights that get grounded together when the car is in reverse, which is going to be really easy to do. So I got to figure that out really quick. Besides that though, the swap is done. And just to prove it to you, so those two are jumped. We're going to start the car. It's going to be pretty freaking loud, and it's really not that good for your engine, but we're going to do it anyway. Okay. Whew. It's pretty loud. Okay, so now let's figure out what which of those two plugs is my jumper. So here they are. Hopefully the reverse light switch on the transmission isn't dead. First, let's go ahead and jump just that circuit to be sure that my wiring diagram is correct. I'm almost positive it's correct just because of the ignition circuit was the correct one. So we're going to pull that out and shove it in next door. I have those two jumped. And I'm going to turn the car on and see if the reverse lights are on. And my reverse lights are on. Now I got to figure out which of those two plugs is my correct switch. So this guy is plugged in like that. This guy gets plugged in like that. And we're gonna try which one looks like more of a reverse. We're gonna try the gray one first. So the gray is the brown and yellow and black and yellow, which I have in my hand. We grab this guy. Now to test this, we're gonna go stick the car in reverse, turn on the switch, and go check the back. So really, you have a 50-50 chance of doing this right the first time. Okay, so there's one. There's a reverse. And nothing. Well, I was wrong. Or there's just something going on with my transmission. So the brown one, it's getting real dark. But the brown one, so it's jumped right now. And like we saw before, oh, it's not in gear. So reverse. We got reverse lights. Now let's go to second. Still got reverse lights. Let's go neutral. And we're off. So I think my reverse lockout switch or my reverse light switch might just be dead, because the other one doesn't work, the other cable. So yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna worry about that later and get on to more important things, like figuring out what I'm gonna do to jump the ignition circuit, and then I can get my exhaust back on. So we'll get back to you on the reverse light thing. Okay, so I was debating on really how I should do it. So what you could do, it's getting really dark, but you could pull this bad boy apart with really small flathead screwdrivers. You can pop the pins out. This gray piece will slide off and it'll leave you with the exposed pin bed. And you can do it that way. I decided, heck, snip the wires and butt connect them together. So 2 into 1. And then I'm going to slide some heat shrink right over the top. Just like that. Seal off that end. No water gets in. Nothing is doing anything with the back end. And we'll be good to go. I will always be able to start the car. Okay, so that worked great. It throws an engine code because there's no automatic transmission plugged in. I probably would have run it like that for a good year until I got around to finishing the wiring, because it runs just fine. It does idle slightly high, but everything works. And so I didn't really see a reason why to try and mess with the rest of the wiring. But now I'm going to do it so that everybody who's doing it themselves and does need to pass inspection with no check engine light, it will be able to do it. So what we're going to do today, we're going to swap the ECU and put it on manual mode, and then splice together some more wires so that everything will run right and the car will be fully manual swapped. By the end of this, you shouldn't have any check engine codes, your car should run just fine, and it'll be great. So the main thing, many of you are probably wondering, is if you need to get a manual ECU. Subaru used the same ECU for their manual and their automatic cars. So all we have to do is ground out a pin and we'll be good to go. So right under here, obviously there's some screws and stuff you need to pull out that I have already taken apart. And there we go. There is your ECU. Okay, so that's about as far out as you need it to be. You can pop this cap off. Alright, when you're looking at the ECU from, let's call this the bottom, the top is going to be the side with the sticker or the label on it. And actually, let me unplug and I'll just show you. So this is the top. Right here, okay? So what you want to do is actually just look at the bottom. To orient yourself, this is on the bottom right hand bank. There is on the farthest, I guess, left pin, it's gonna be a green one. Right next to that is this red and blue striped one with two silver dots together. That is your neutral safety switch, or your neutral circuit, whatever you want to call it. This connects to your neutral lockout on your automatic transmission, and we're also going to connect it straight to the neutral switch on our manual transmission. Now this next one over obviously looks a whole lot different because you need to add in a pin. Is empty on your automatic. When you switch to manual, you need to put in some kind of pin between the pink and the red and blue stripe. Alright? The automatics don't come with anything there because without this pin being grounded on the ECU, the car thinks it's an automatic. So when we plug in a pin and we ground it, this wire is just going to the dash support and bolting on, so it's grounding out. I pulled this pin out of the large 16 connector pin that is no longer used. I peeled apart the connector and I pulled this pin out. And even though it's bigger, it still works. It plugs in and it does connect to the pin out on the ECU because the car thinks it's a manual now. So that's the next thing you need to do. Just put in a pin and ground it right between the blue with red stripe and silver dots and the pink with silver dots. So that's the only things you have to do on the ECU. And I'm just going to go over it one more time just to orient yourself so you're totally sure what you're looking for. This is the top of the ECU. We're working on the right hand bank of plugs on the very bottom row. And so you're going to be looking for 3 pins from the left. Should be empty on an automatic. It's between a pink and a blue and red striped wire. That should be empty, and you're going to want to put a pin in there and ground it to turn your ECU into a manual ECU. So once you've done that, you can just kind of shove it all back together you can take this and just kind of route that in there and shove this whole thing back on. So then you stick it back on and twist it over and you're locked in. You're good to go. How it's supposed to be. Like that. And like that. Now, you can see my pin. That ground wire comes up and bolts on right here. So this is going to sit up back behind my glove box. Okay? So that's it. We're done with the ECU. Shove your kick panel back up in there. Bolt it all back together. And you're done with that part. So after you do the ECU and you plug in that pin, you're going to come back to your driver's side and you're going to pull out your TCU. So it's the computer that runs the automatic transmission. The next thing you need to do is remove that. In order to ensure that you won't get any codes thrown, you might as well just unplug it because it's not doing anything anymore. This piece pulled down. Remember when we swapped our pedals? There was a big ECU control module that was in the way. That was our TCM. What I had done is I had zip tied it back up in here. So I clipped the zip tie, pulled it forward, and there are 3 plugs on the back of it. You just unplug those 3 plugs, shove them back up in there, and pull out your TCU. So now we're going to go over to the engine bay side and do the wiring we need to over here. Okay, when you're to this point, you don't have anywhere to plug this guy into, you don't have anywhere to plug this guy into, and you should have both of these wires just kind of hanging out. Right? On my transmission, these are the colorings. They should be somewhat similar to the transmission you're doing, but again, it's not that big of a deal because there are only 2 plugs coming off the manual transmission, so you can try this with one, and if it doesn't work, you just swap them, right? So the easiest way to diagnose which lead is which, first off, I'll tell you, the brown connector is the neutral switch, and the gray connector are your reverse lights. So you have this big 4x4 connector. It is garbage. You could snip it off right there at the harness, and you're done. Haven't done anything with it yet. It's just kind of hanging out. You don't need it. The other one is a 4x3. This is the important one. This one actually has more to do with what's going on with the transmission anyway. And so what I did, so you can see right here, is where I pulled the pin. There's no backing on this, so I ripped the backing off so that I could pull a pin out. And that is the pin that I used to plug in to my ECU and ground out the ECU to turn it to manual mode. Now the thing that I did initially, this wire and this wire that I pulled out, I just grounded those 2 together. Now that will work just fine if you're going to do it the first way, where you're going to run your car just in neutral. And that works just fine. Now these 2, so the gray wire goes to your reverse lights. Now your reverse lights are right here on this pin. So these 2, this one and this one, are your neutral safety switch or your parking switch, ignition circuit, whatever you want to call it. Those are the 2 you're looking for. Your reverse lights are just these next 2 on that bottom side. So on that bottom row, these 2 link up with those 2, and they're pretty similarly colored, which makes it really easy. You want to splice those 2 together, and that will give you a good reverse light circuit. So brown to brown, black to black. We're going to go ahead and do that now. If you're worried, you can test these before you cut and splice. So you can take these guys, so you can stick them down in the pins to make sure that that's right before you do this. I have already done that, and so they're going bye-bye. Alright, there's those two. This wire is fairly long. Oh, not that one. So these wires are fairly long, so I am going to go ahead and snip them off a little shorter so that I don't have a massively long wire hanging around in here. There you go, there's your reverse lights. Now, your neutral safety switch. I have a green wire and a red or a black and red striped wire. This green wire has a yellow stripe on it. So I'm connecting that to the same wire we saw coming out of the ECU. The blue wire with the red stripe and the two silver spots. That's what the green wire goes to. So we're going to connect it up. There we go. Now this red one, you want to check and make sure that this is grounded. Now it is on mine. So we're going to connect this guy into there. There you go. So we got those two together, and we got those two together. Just kind of shove these guys down in here for now. Come back with a zip tie and zip tie these together. Make them small, make them so they won't be getting in the way of anything else. And there you have it. That is the extent of the wiring for a manual swap. It's pretty simple. The hardest part is finding which wires go where, but I just showed you where they're at. This will work for 90s Legacies and Imprezas, and most likely Foresters. The shape of the connectors might change a little bit, and the color of the wires might change, but you'll be able to find a wiring diagram online so that you can do the exact same thing we just did. I told you what the connectors do and which ones you need to plug where. With that information, you should be able to transpose it onto whatever body style or year you're working with. It's a really simple thing to do, and it makes for a great driving experience. Alright, the other thing that I should mention when you do this, the way that we connected our neutral switch to the neutral safety switch on the ECU, it makes it so you can only start your car in gear. So, there's first and second, right? So now I'm in neutral, and I go to start it. And nothing happens. So then, I go down into second, and don't you need to run the clutch pedal so that the car won't start unless the clutch pedal is engaged? Now that's a great question, and I'm not going to do that. You can, but you need a relay. So what you're thinking is, shouldn't you just run the neutral safety switch on the ECU to the clutch pedal switch? Now, lots of people try that and it doesn't work. Now, the reason it doesn't work is because on the automatic and on the manual, they're backwards. So on the manual, when the clutch is up or not engaged, the switch is closed. And then when you push on it, the switch opens, so you don't actually get a connection of a ground that the neutral safety switch on the ECU needs. So you could remedy this by a simple relay, and I will let you do your own research on how to put in a relay. I wasn't really worried about it because I know that I am the one driving this car mainly. And to start it, it has to be in gear. It might take you a couple of times to try and start it with it in gear, but you'll learn really quick that that's not going to work, and it'll kill your starter. So don't do that. It would be nice, yes, to wire that relay, but for now I am not going to, because this is simpler. and I don't want to run any wires across the tunnel or around the inside of the car. It works for me. If you want to make yours hook up to the clutch pedal, go for it. But that's not the way I'm doing mine. Hopefully that explanation answers that question as to why it doesn't work and how you can go about remedying it. Because of that, you have to start your car in gear, like I showed you. And hopefully, if it's in gear, you will remember to put in the clutch. And there you go. As always, thanks for watching. Make sure to check out my Instagram for current updates. And if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and I'll get back to them as soon as I can. Be sure to supplement this video with your own research. Figure out the color of wires that correspond to what I did for your own make and model and for the transmission you're putting in. Now, I put in an older transmission. If you put in a newer transmission, the colors might be slightly different. Do your research and you'll be good to go.